All right, we should be live.
Thanks, Elaine. Hey, y'all. I've never done a live, so I think we're gonna wait about 3 minutes just while we have some folks join. But we're super excited to have you here and to have you joining this conversation with Lena and I. Cool. So while we wait, again, we're just going to give folks about 3 minutes just to make sure that people can hop on to the Facebook Live. But while we wait, we'll just start off with some casual conversation. So, Lena, yeah, I'm excited to have this discussion with you. We were reflecting yesterday, and we literally started working a week, like Wednesday. So it's been less than a week.
Yeah, like a week ago, and then we just kind of jumped right into the work. So we're really excited to kind of build this project together, and then hopefully excited for your questions today and your ideas on how we can best serve students during this kind of really crazy time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know we're going to dive into things a little bit more when we do our introductions, but I am curious, Lena, I know you've talked about being from Georgia and growing up in Georgia, and have lived in North Carolina most, if not all of my life. So just curious, you're close to Atlanta?
So I'm 30 minutes north of Atlanta, so Atlanta suburbs.
Okay, cool. So did you ever get a chance to go to, were you in Atlanta often? I don't know what the city life, quote unquote, is like.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like saying that I'm from Atlanta just because I haven't really lived here for 6 years. So I left, after high school. So I think when I talk to like other young people about like, what is Atlanta like? I don't really know Atlanta as a young adult. I kind of know Atlanta more as a kid and as a teenager. Mm-hmm. So I know all the like touristy spots, and my parents really like to take us to museums. So really well acquainted with all that. And Piedmont Park is kind of like the central park of Atlanta. I really like that. But if you like ask me like restaurants to go to or kind of like more nightlife, I have no clue where to go. But I'm also moving, like now I've moved back here, and hopefully when it's okay to go outside, I'll get reacquainted with Atlanta as a young adult.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a cool new experience, to your point of getting reacquainted in a different way than what it was in your childhood. So
yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we'll dive into, sorry, Lena, go ahead.
No, I'm wondering, when you're talking about living in North Carolina your whole life, has it always been in the same place?
Yeah, so I grew up in a super small rural town, and we'll dive into that during our introductions. But yes, I have not moved. I've lived in different cities in North Carolina, but shout out to Rockingham, Richmond County, 910. Yeah, I've been there or grew up there, and that's where I call home. So definitely, there is no light knife to explore in Rockingham. So do not have any of those experiences, or not. To be honest, not looking to go back either, though I do enjoy it. My family's still there. But it's just very different now living in different cities. But we can go ahead and dive into our conversation, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about our upbringing and our kind of experiences that bring us into this work. So welcome everyone, bienvenidos to our cafecito. We are so excited to have you join us as we break down the power of centering culture and community in the college advising process. We, as we mentioned earlier, have only known each other for less than a week. We met each other last Wednesday. So it's going to be a really great experience of not only getting to discuss the work, but also getting to know each other through this conversation. So this is going to be happening live right before your eyes. We're going to be talking about some stories and sharing our expertise in this field. And we're really excited to learn more from each other. To our audience who is joining us via Facebook and Zoom, please feel free to drop in any thoughts in the comments in the chat. We would love to include you in this conversation and weave those throughout our discussion. So like I mentioned, we're going to start off with introductions. So Lena, I'll give you the floor if you could just share a little bit more about your background, what you studied and where, and then the role at Latinx that we share, and more specifically, why are you looking forward to serving in this role?
So thank you for joining us, guys, today during your lunch break. Hopefully you're eating a snack or joining us with some drinks. So we're really excited to get started on this work. And like Kiara said, we're also getting to know each other. So you're watching this bonding process live. We're both really excited about the work, come from a similar place. And we're really excited to bring this energy into the work. So my name is Lina Palancares. I was born in Mexico City. Again, not necessarily Mexico City, but the suburbs. And I moved to Atlanta when I was 10. I had never been on a plane before I moved here. My dad was looking for new opportunities, and he was looking on his like alumni page of his university, and this restaurant opportunity popped up, and he said, "How would you guys feel about moving to Atlanta?" And I was like, "What's in Atlanta?" My only point of reference was that Disney World was in Florida and that Georgia was the state above Florida. So I really had no idea how US geography worked. I knew that Texas was kind of close to Mexico. So I was like, okay, well, it's not Texas, somewhere farther away. So it was a big adventure. My parents are big believers in taking big leaps of faith, even when things are scary, just kind of jumping for it and then kind of figuring things out as you go. And that's a little bit kind of how my college application process was. I think, starting to go to school, I always felt like college was the goal, but I didn't really know what that entailed or what it meant to kind of be striving towards that. So my mom actually worked in Athens, Georgia, which is the college town where the University of Georgia is. So actually going to work with her, grew up really close to that campus and kind of had an idea of what a university was like just by seeing it, but again, didn't know how you would apply or like what grades you needed or what kind of extracurriculars it took to get you there. I was really lucky that I had really great teachers in high school that kind of really motivated me and really pushed me to look for more than I even realized was available. And the summer before my senior year, right? So junior year, where you're kind of starting to think about, okay, what is my college list going to look like? Where am I going to apply? Really, I only had 2 schools on that list, University of Georgia and then Georgia Tech, because those are the ones that I had visited. Really great schools, competitive. I knew that if I went there, I'd be successful, but really I was kind of limited by what I knew, by what I could see. That summer, I was really lucky that I was part of a pilot program by the College Board, where they sent me this packet in the mail, that was my college advisor. So I got this packet in the mail that said, based on your socioeconomic status and based on your SAT scores, we think that you could probably apply to more competitive schools, but we think that you probably won't. So those of you who kind of know the college landscape, you know that if you take the SAT that comes with a fee waiver, that comes with 4 fee waivers to apply to schools. What this packet did was they mailed me directly 8 fee waivers. So that instantly doubles kind of your choices of where you can apply to schools. So my current list of, okay, I'll apply to probably Georgia State, University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, maybe University of North Georgia, kind of like really got expanded and blown up of thinking, okay, well, now that I have all these extra options, like I might as well really like throw it out there and then kind of see what lands. So then that summer, kind of really impromptu, my parents took some days off of work, and we decided to go on a college tour of the East Coast. My grandpa lived in Delaware. So we were like, okay, so between Atlanta and Delaware, what kind of schools can we hit? So Duke ended up being the first visit on our tour, and it just kind of happened to be that way because it was along 85 where we were kind of driving up anyway. And my mom was like, well, I heard it was a good school. We only know it because of basketball, but like, let's try it out. Went toward the school, saw the grades that they asked for. It seemed ridiculous and insane, but I really liked the feeling of it. And I really liked that it was still in the Southeast because it felt familiar to me. And I was like, I don't know if I can go further away than this. So Duke ended up making it on the list, ended up applying, ended up getting in somehow, and then really grew academically, but really grew as a person because it was my first time away from home. I think a lot of Latinas can relate that the idea of going out of state for college is insane, or the idea of like not living at home like before getting married is something that's crazy and something that people don't really think about. So it was definitely a tension and a conversation that I had to keep having with my parents of like we, you know, we came to this country for new opportunities and it's going to hurt for me to be far away. But it's something that they understood and something that they supported. That we just, again, had to take those big leaps of faith and then hope that things turned out well. And while I was at Duke, I got really involved with different nonprofits that worked for immigrant rights. And so this first summer after my freshman year, I went to Arizona and worked in Tucson with an organization that helped LGBTQ migrants seeking asylum. And then that summer was life-changing and really showed me the different facets of the immigrant experience and what happens when you have different marginalized identities, when those intersect, how hard it is to get through life. So I came back to North Carolina and really wanted to stay involved, even if it wasn't in the same way because I wasn't close to the border. But, you know, again, as many of us that have that immigrant experience can see, the border kind of happens everywhere. There's different parts of it that happen, and the immigrant experiences across the United States are endless and diverse and full of stories and heartache, but also joy and achievements. So I was really excited to see what that kind of looked like in North Carolina. So I ended up getting involved with Student Action with Farmworkers, and I completed 4 of their programs. They couldn't get rid of me. And they worked a lot with not only trying to advocate for the rights of farm workers, but also trying to advocate for their kids to get an education. So learned a lot about educational access through them, learned a lot about the barriers that undocumented and documented kids face. And then the year after graduating Duke, I ended up joining College Advising Corps. And I worked at Northern High School in Durham, where I really got to, again, hands-on, meet kind of students where they were at in their college journeys and just kind of present options to them, options that maybe they didn't think were available to them, because I knew what that was like. I knew that in my own college journey, I was really limited by my vision and by what I'd seen. And it wasn't because I was presented other options, I was able to go somewhere else, to go further than I would have imagined. So I think that was my big thing of just making sure that kids had the information available to them so that they could make the best choice for them in their college journey. And then this past year, I completed my master's degree at the University of Chicago. And it was a really great experience. But again, I really struggled my thesis was about Latinx identity, and in writing that, I couldn't find a Latinx advisor that kind of matched my interest, and I couldn't find that many classes on the Latinx experience, and there weren't that many Latinx peers in my program. So that really had me missing college access. Of course, if you can't make it past high school and you can't make it past community college, you can't make it past, a four-year university, how are you, then you're going to make it to these like spaces of higher education, where people who kind of look like you, who represent your interests, who kind of understand your story better, how can they support you on your journey if they can't make it there? So I was really kind of itching to get back into this work, and then saw the posting for the virtual college advisor through Latinx. I think I applied within 5 minutes of seeing it because I was just super excited. So I'm really excited to build this with you, to kind of recruit the students, and to help them through this journey, which is already stressful and terrifying, and now adding all these, these extra layers to it. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you to kind of, so you can share about your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lena. I just saw someone in the comments chatting that they work, Christina works at with the Emily K Center Game Plan College Program and works at Northern. So just a special shout out to that Northern connection there from our audience.
Yay!
But yeah, thank you, Lena, for sharing that information. There's definitely a lot of similarities in our stories. So just to start off, my name is Kiara Aranda. I was born in California, but lived there maybe until I was 5. We moved to Mexico. My parents are from Jalisco. So I lived there for about a year and a half, maybe, and then moved to Rockingham, North Carolina. So really a lot of my transformative slash like experiences that I think about home are always related to Rockingham, largely because that's the most time that I've spent, or the most years I've spent in, I spent the most years growing up in Rockingham. So yes, shout out to Jalisco. I love all of y'all, but special shout out. So growing up in Rockingham definitely had a huge impact on my identity development, having grown up in the South. I think that was something that I didn't realize until maybe afterwards, of how unique, kind of Lena, to your point about these, borders existing everywhere, right? Not just literally at the border, but having this experience of, yes, growing up Latina in the South, but also in the South of the United States. That is a very different experience than folks who are maybe in, Florida or in New York or in California. I feel like their Latinidad and experiences are very different than someone who is growing up in rural North Carolina. So I say that because my experiences in rural North Carolina very much shaped my passion for education. So as I was going through the education system, I was I was very much shaped by the fact that I was placed in advanced placement courses, that I was, classified as an AIG student, and that gave me access to more information that a lot of my peers didn't, have access to. So the conversations around college for me came up by discussions with classmates. I remember having a conversation with a friend their junior year, our junior year, and they were like, yes, we can sign up for the SAT, and I was going to take it in, I think they were taking it in December. And I was like, I don't even know what the SAT is. Like, what are you talking about? And, having to find that information. I remember having to pay for that first SAT. I didn't know that fee waivers were a thing, and having to ask my parents for the money, and I'm trying to remember if I actually worked then, because I did work for most of my time, but it was a thing. I had to figure out how to pay for the test. And it was just something that I did not know. I didn't know anything. So that experience was really fundamental in shaping why, again, I'm so passionate about college access. So as I navigated the college application process and got to eventually Carolina, I only applied to 2, 3 schools. I got into 3 and chose Carolina. Similarly, Lena, I was laughing when you were talking about like the basketball experience. I chose Carolina because my basketball team took us to UNC for a tour, and that was the only school I had ever visited. So I was like, okay, I think that works. It'll be fine. So chose UNC, and at UNC really grew and was challenged a lot. I think both personally and professionally. On a personal level, that was the first time I was away from home. It was the first time that I really had to, figure things out on my own. And not because my family didn't want to help, but largely because they just couldn't and didn't know how. And then also I think a huge part of it was that, you know, child of immigrant mentality of like, my parents have sacrificed so much, like I have to figure this out. I can't burden them more, like they're already doing so much for me. So definitely a lot of, you know, challenges at UNC. I made it out by, you know, what is it, the skin on my teeth? I don't know if that's a true saying. I also
Yeah.
a lot of the sayings, but yeah, so made it out. And then while I was at Carolina, I participated in this mentorship program with NC SLY at the time, and really found a passion for, again, access and college, you know, ensuring that students had access to whatever possibilities they wanted to after high school graduation. So did NC SLY and was adamant that I was not going to go into education. So I was like, I'm not doing education. Everyone would tell me like, you would be great. You should go into education. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm good. Thanks though. And ultimately ended up in education. I served 2 years with the Carolina College Advising Corps, and it was just such a transformative experience for me in terms of why I, again, am so passionate about, you know, making sure that students have someone in their corner and making sure that our students have access to the information that they may not otherwise be able to access. And I served in Charlotte, North Carolina at Derringer High School. So shout out to the Wildcats. But that was such an incredible experience. Again, I loved it. I wish I could have done it forever. My students were amazing. And then ultimately ended up, after my 2 years of service, ended up serving with the Emily K Center as a college readiness counselor. And that again was an incredible experience. And I think it was at that point that I was like, okay, I'm going to be in education. Like, even if I try to get out, like this is not going to work. I love it so much. The students are so amazing. And so with the Emily K Center, I worked with a cohort of students and helped them through their high school time. So that was also a great experience, largely because it allowed me to see the challenges that students face that a lot of times we don't think about, how from the beginning of your high school experience that can shape, you know, where you end up, right? So if a student, for example, doesn't have access to those AP courses, a lot of times they're now not eligible to apply to some more selective institutions, not because they can't submit an application, but because they just won't be deemed as competitive as other students. So again, that experience really made me realize the impact of just the high school education and how that will ultimately shape college access. And then after I finished, my students graduated in 2019, so they're currently sophomores in college. So I was able to continue working with my students and currently serve doing some college persistence work with the Emily K Center. And again, just an incredible experience. I keep talking about my students. They're amazing, y'all. Like, I cannot hype them up enough. They really are such great students, and have taught me so much. And I think in this new role with persistence, just thinking about, again, some of those, you know, issues, challenges, barriers that manifest themselves within the college persistence piece of their lives, right? So like whether that is lack of preparation in the high school curriculum that now, you know, manifests itself as academic challenges in college, whether that is a lack of social preparation that again manifests itself into some of those challenges that they face socially in the college setting. I've just learned so much and am incredibly grateful to come back into the space with doing some college access work with Latinx Ed. So I think I maybe have already touched on why this role is incredibly meaningful, but I love the college access work. And I think there's just so much that can be done in this space. And particularly as you think about the students that we're hoping to serve, just, you know, thinking about rural students who don't often get a lot of the services, Latinx students who are often, you know, not receiving the information in a way that's culturally relevant. Because Lena, you mentioned some of those challenges with, you know, moving out of state and what those conversations look like. And again, not that other folks don't experience those same conversations, but I do think there needs to be some intentionality as we think about Latinx students. So excited to be here and excited to have this conversation with you. We know we definitely dove deep into our personal introductions, but excited to start hitting some of those questions that might come up.
Yeah, of course. It was really, again, I think every meeting that we have and get to know more about you, like finding all these things that we have in common has also been really, really cool. So we've talked a lot about ourselves. So now we want to kind of introduce the work that we're going to do a little bit more. So we both work for Latinx Ed. If you're watching on the Facebook, you're probably already liked the page. If you're watching through Zoom, make sure you like the page, subscribe to the newsletter, all that stuff, so you get to know when cool things like this are happening. So Latinx Ed is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to amplify the lived experiences of Latinx immigrants in North Carolina. And so we want to break down those educational barriers that Kara and I have both talked about kind of encountering as you go through this educational process. And obviously, right now, a lot of the things that we're talking about are college centered, but obviously those barriers happen, as soon as kids go into the educational system. So we manifest this mission through our work with a new program called College y Consejos, which translates to college and tips or advices. And College y Consejos is a free virtual college advising space where we center Cultura and Comunidad as we help students who navigate the college application process. We are serving both 11th and 12th grade students in North Carolina who identify as Latinx, and they will generally be first generation college students. So if you're listening to this conversation today, something touches your heart, you kind of, are excited about also helping us get this project started. Also, please consider donating to Latinx Ed so we can continue this work and so we can continue reaching more students. Also, if you're interested in receiving information about our new program, College y Consejos, there will be a link dropped on both the Zoom chat and the Facebook Live chat that if you're interested or you know a student who is interested, please fill out the URL that we will be dropping shortly.
Yeah, and I believe Elaine just dropped it in the Zoom, and I know we have our wonderful colleague Alice, who's also a part of this work, who will also be in the chat dropping information as well. So be on the lookout for that in those chats. So we'll go ahead and dive into some questions that have been previously submitted, but again, we want this to be a discussion that really includes any questions that you all might have. So please feel free to continue dropping those in the chat and we'll get to those. But just to start off, we're gonna center this conversation around the 3 C's for Latinx Ed, which is a framework that is shaping the college access and success work of the organization. And those 3 C's are culture, community, and college. So Lena, could you share a little bit more about why these 3 C's are important to you and the role and the work that we do here at Latinx Ed?
Yeah, so like we've been talking about, we've only kind of been at this for a week, but we've already hit the ground running. And in starting to visualize what we want this program to be, it was really important for us to have these values in mind and to think about how we approach advising, and especially approaching culturally specific advising, right? So we want to make sure that when we are interacting with students, we tell them that this space is going to be a little bit different than if they went to a college advisor or they went to their counselor in high school, because we can take a much more niche approach, right? So when students sometimes think about college, it's very framed in like, okay, what are my academic goals? What are kind of like, what is the job that I want to get after I graduate college? And obviously that's a big part of it. But also we want to tell students that college and leaving home and kind of being independent for the first time, it's also a huge time period for personal growth and for you to discover kind of what's important to you, what your passions are, how you build relationships, how you make friendships outside of, if you went through K through 12 in the same kind of school system and always kind of had the same friends, what does it mean now to go to a school where you're going to meet, students from all over? How do you build relationships across those differences? And especially being a Latinx student, there's going to be very few of you on campus, right? So how do you build community there? How do you find that support system? How do you make sure that you pick the right school that works for you academically, but also works for you emotionally and spiritually? Like, are you going to feel supported? Are you going to feel kind of like that's going to be, especially if you live on campus, that's going to be home for the next 4 years. So we really want to make sure that we keep these 3 things in mind when we are approaching advising and when we're also approaching building our new community of college consejos, because we also want, the students to kind of get to know each other and share resources and maybe answer each other's questions, or then, maybe make a new friend before you even get to campus. I don't know if you, Kiara, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the big piece that I would add about this culture and community is also kind of what you just mentioned at the end there, Lena, about the importance of having a community as you're navigating this process, right? So a lot of times, if you are one of the few Latinx students at your high school, or even if you do have other folks, it's just nice to have a space where you can, have conversations about things that are a lot of times unique to your experience. So I think about, when I was applying for financial aid, my parents were undocumented and I didn't know what that FAFSA application necessarily was going to look like. So having a community where other folks may have similar experiences, largely because that is something that affects the Latinx community and immigrant communities in general. I think it would be incredibly important as students navigate this process, so that this process does not feel alone, right? So we really want to make sure that students feel like they have a support system of not only, folks who like Lena, myself, Alice, the rest of the Latinx ed team that are invested in their well-being, but also just peers who are going through the same process and who can provide that feedback and that community that Lena previously shared. And then I think about the other big piece with culture that comes up for me is, when you think about Latinx students, a lot of times the college application process and decision is a family decision, right? So as much as we think that it is an individual process, but a lot of times the students in particular want to talk it out with their families and really, even if parents are not informed and aware about the college application process, a lot of times our decision on where we choose to go to college is shaped by our family, right? And whether that is we want to stay close to family, sometimes we want to get away, whatever that might look like. I think there's an important piece there that we need to include families more in these conversations, and I think that's where that culture piece will be incredibly helpful and important. So just kind of wanted to add those 2 pieces there.
Yeah, and I think your point about the FAFSA, I think even sometimes with Latinx students having 2 last names, the IRS retrieval tool, the thing that's supposed to really make it super easy to fill out the FAFSA, doesn't work, right? So even if you already have this privilege of being documented and having documented parents, there's all these kind of like hurdles that like other, college advisors or college counselors might not know that Latinx students face. Yeah. So I guess we kind of already started talking a little bit about this, but if you have more to add about your own experience applying to college, and then what, if anything, do you wish had been different about the advice that you received?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest, so I've talked a little bit about my experience. So definitely did not know anything. My parents were super supportive in the sense of like, yes, if you want to go to college, like we encourage it, you should go to college. But that was really the extent of what they could offer, right? And that to me, that still was incredibly helpful, right? Like I knew I had their support. I knew that if there was ever anything that I needed, they would be more than happy to provide. Even at that point, they didn't necessarily understand why they needed that. They needed to provide a certain piece of information. They were always incredibly helpful. So that is one thing that I'll always be grateful for. And that definitely made my experience a little bit less challenging to navigate. But outside of that, it was really all me, like having to figure out everything. I'm also grateful that I had access to a computer. So I was very privileged that I did have a computer at home and was able to like Google things and find a lot of stuff online. So I was able to, a lot of my college advising came from Google. So shout out to Google for their services and ensuring that I had the information I needed to be able to apply to college. But I think one of the things that I wish had been different about the advising, or even better, is that at my high school, it was the only high school in the county. So my graduating class was maybe 400 something people. So it was a huge high school, and there wasn't really intentional one-on-one support. I mean, like, that was just at the height, the senior class, right? Like, I cannot imagine my counselor having time to go out and, meet with every single student. Like, it wasn't feasible because of the amount of students that they have on their caseload. And I think that's unfortunately the reality of, counseling in the state of North Carolina. They are very much overworked and have a lot of students on their caseload. So I definitely wish I would have had the opportunity to connect with someone one-on-one to talk about my, like what I wanted to do. But I will say that my counselor tried, she would have scholarships available, would make announcements about when those were available. So that was incredibly helpful, because that was one of the biggest things that I was worried about throughout my whole process. Like, yes, I know I want to go to college, but how am I going to pay for this? Like, my parents don't have money. I sure don't have money. So what is that going to look like? So scholarships were a huge thing. And I think that motivated me to really seek out those applications. But yeah, I wish that I would have had the opportunity to connect with someone individually. So I will also say that I think having to navigate the process on my own inspired me to, like, I didn't want anyone else to have to do that again, right? And I remember my first year of high school, my sister is a year younger than me, and she was applying to college, and I created like a little, here's your college going checklist. These are things that you to do. And if, looking back, I'm like, girl, you really didn't think you were going to be in education after you did that. It's just, how did that not click?
There were signs.
Yeah, there were many signs. So I think that was, my experience was really a catalyst for my passion for college access, because I didn't want anyone to ever feel so alone in the process. So I think that's definitely how I felt a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think this whole of like having to figure it out thing really resonates with me. So my graduating class was 700. And it started out with a freshman class of around 800 people. So massive high school. I think our counselors were required to meet one-on-one with us at first, just like as a general, are you applying to college? But those meetings didn't happen until senior year, right? So by senior year, it's kind of like really late if you haven't taken your SATs. So thankfully, I had taken my SATs in my junior year. The big challenge that kind of came after that College Board packet came in, encouraging me to apply to these more selective schools, is that more selective schools, I think some of this is kind of phasing out, but require SAT subject tests. And I was like, what? So I already took this SAT test, and now I have to take an SAT subject test in a particular subject. So I was like, I guess I can take the world history one, but I took world history my sophomore year of high school, so I had already forgotten about a lot of that. So if I had known that, the SAT subject test was a thing, maybe I would have taken it earlier on, when I, again, still kind of had that like world history knowledge in my head. So had to restudy for that. And then thankfully I took French in high school, and I felt pretty comfortable with French, so decided to take French. And then schools require 3, right? So I was really just like racking my brain for what my third test would be. And my mom just like had this like dream and woke up the next day. She was like, Lena, and I was like, what? She's like, Spanish, Spanish. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And I almost felt like cheating that I took the Spanish, but then she was like, why would that be cheating? Like, that's a skill that you have. And like, that's a skill that you can show colleges. So I ended up taking world history, French, and Spanish subject tests, because I knew that I didn't have to study for the French one and didn't have to study for the Spanish one. And then really kind of took my energies into studying for the world history one. And that was, another thing that we had to figure out. And you have to, again, pay for each one, figure out a date that works, and then try to take them, again, have that time to study, but take them early on, early on enough that when you apply to college, like they'll receive those grades, because otherwise it was for nothing. So again, was really lucky to have my mom really involved in the process. I think my mom did a lot of Googling for me, and she kind of like had a calendar scheduled out of like, we're gonna get these applications in by like December 1st, because I don't want like winter break or like New Year to come and like we have family over and we have like, you know, the Christmas parties, and I don't want you sitting at that computer like turning in this application. So she was super on top of the process and super involved, and something that I know that not a lot of students have access to. And again, she like had to learn with me, because we moved here from Mexico. We didn't understand how the process worked. So again, my mom is a superstar, and my mom was my college advisor. And I feel like endlessly grateful to have had her so involved in the process that, again, I knew that I wanted to sort of be that support system for someone else, and really had that in mind when I joined College Advising Corps. Because yeah, my high school was no help at all, in kind of providing guidance of what it is that I needed to do. So really that college board packet that I don't think, like, I have met very few people that have received it. So something that's not very widely available. And then my mom taking the time. So I really feel like a lot of, you know, the stars almost had to align for me to end up where I ended up. So that almost became frustrating later of like, why did it have to be this like 1 in a million thing of like, why isn't this information wildly available? And why, to apply to more selective schools, do you have to take like 10 extra steps? And then something that then became apparent after applying to these more selective institutions is that it was actually cheaper for me to go to Duke than it would have been for me to go to UGA, because Duke has need-based financial aid. So in the state of Georgia, if you have documentation and if you have a certain GPA, you get access to Hope Scholarship, which covers 100% of tuition. So I would have gotten that if I had gone in-state, but then of course there's all the like extra fees of if you live on campus, you know, paying for books, meal plan, like, okay, like we have no savings, like all my family ever has had is debt. So like, how do we then like find the money to pay for college? So if I hadn't applied to these like more selective institutions, and if I hadn't gone to Duke, I would have graduated with piles and piles of debt, just to be able to go to college. So I think there's also this narrative of like, if your parents don't make this much money, or if you don't have savings, like a savings account that's specifically for college, like a lot of like more privileged students might have, then there's this idea of like, I could never apply to like a Stanford or a Princeton or a Yale, because like, how can I afford that? If you look online, it says tuition and fees, it'll be like $70,000, which for a lot of people will be more than their parents make in a year, like combined. Like it's just completely out of the picture. But again, because a lot of these schools do need-based financial aid, it will actually end up being a lot cheaper for students to go there. So I think the biggest part I learned about my own journey, and then also advising students, is just the lack of information, that if you're the first person figuring this out, sometimes you go to Google for questions, but then sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask. So then how will you get the information if you don't even know the starting point?
Yeah, I mean, everything that you were saying was speaking to my soul. You were putting me back in high school. Okay, I was like, Lord, remembering all these pieces of the process that I just could not figure out. So I know we want to be conscious of time. So we do have about 17 minutes left. So we'll hop on to address some of the questions that have been sent in, and then we'll go back to the questions that we have if we have more time. So from Eden, we have, do you find that the presence of a Latinx community at a particular college plays a large role in a student's decision for where to go to college?
So I wish it did more, but then I think it's hard. Again, it's hard to even know what kind of questions to ask or what to think about, like what's important. I think in advising students, my experience has been that they come in with like, okay, I heard my friend, my older sibling talk about this major and it sounded like the major for me, and I want to come into this meeting not seeming like I don't have any information. So what they do is like, okay, I'm looking for a school that has this major on the list. And, for like a high school student that has, only taken like language arts, history, like math, science in high school, like sometimes your students come in really set on a major. Right. So then that really kind of like limits the schools that they're looking at, not realizing that probably once they get on campus, their major is going to change 10 times. And it probably would have been more useful to look at, again, does the school that I'm going to have a cultural center? Just any cultural center. Then does it have a Latinx like center, like specifically for me? Do they like, how is their academic advising? How do they have a program that supports first generation students? But I think, again, a lot of that is being familiar with the college process and then being familiar with the college experience, that sometimes first generation college students don't have the luxury of even knowing to ask those questions. So I think that's kind of when we start putting that, like, that seed in their mind of like planning it, of like, okay, great that you're thinking about major, and like, okay, what else outside of that is important to you? And I think that's hopefully what the perspective that we can bring.
Yeah, I agree. I think it really very much has depended on students. But I will say, having seen or working on the persistence side, there is definitely a lot of benefit to finding that community. And I don't necessarily want to just solely attach it to like cultural or racial identity, though I do think my accent comes out sometimes, do think it is important to have some sort of community that does relate to your racial or ethnic identity. However, really emphasizing the importance of community to students has been, I think, one of the biggest pieces that I've seen help in allowing or encouraging students to find a college that's going to be a good fit for them, because they, I think framing it as you're going to spend the rest, like 4 years of your life on this college campus, you need to make sure that it is a place where you actually want to be. So again, really emphasizing that community piece and how important it is has been critical in making sure that students are succeeding and want to return to their campus at the end of the day. Okay, so I'm looking down, I have the questions on my phone. So for Kristen, I was struck by how much you both spoke and about how you love working with Latinx students in the fields of education and advising. We need more Latinx teachers in North Carolina. What are your thoughts on how to approach this, or accomplish this? That's a great question, Kristen. Just from speaking with my students, I'll give you a little bit of because I was one of those students that didn't want to go into the education field, right? And just in my experience and speaking with my students who do come from immigrant backgrounds, a lot of them, unfortunately, because of how little teachers get paid, don't see education as a field that they want to go into to support families, right? So a lot of students who do come from immigrant backgrounds are always, it's not just about like what they want to achieve, is what I want to achieve so that I can help my family, right? So it's like, it's always about, I need to get into a job that's going to allow me to not only take care of myself, but also be able to provide for my family if they ever need it. So a lot of times those fields for students that want to be able to be financially stable, education just isn't one of them. And a lot of students are choosing to pursue fields like, engineering, anything like doctors. So that is something that I think will require more of a systemic change in terms of, we need to get our educators paid more, period, right? Regardless of whether or not we want to recruit more, teachers of color. But I think that will get at encouraging more folks who want to pursue a field or a career in education. Because that definitely has been one of the biggest pieces of conversation when I talk to students about what they want to pursue, is that they always think about like, okay, yes, like maybe I am interested in this, but the reality is that I need to provide for my family, so I'm going to choose to go this other route. And those are, how can I tell a student who would be a great teacher that you should go into teaching if they're like, but I have to like, provide for my family. I can't be like, no, you should. Definitely go into teaching because, teachers unfortunately aren't getting paid enough. And that's just the unfortunate reality of the field.
Yeah. And I think another aspect to that is like Latinx people, like their own experience with the educational system, right? Where if they went through the educational system, didn't feel supported, didn't feel like their concerns were valued, like they were being, like teachers really supported them, it's hard to then try to like make yourself come back into that space where you didn't feel like part of that and you didn't feel encouraged and you didn't feel supported. So I think, again, like a lot of like the students that I talked to, it was really hard presenting college as an option because they just wanted to be done with school. They were like, I want to graduate early, honestly, when, there's options to do dual enrollment and start getting, Coven classes while you're in high school. A lot of them don't see that as an option because they're just want to be done with school because school is not a place that has supported their dreams and their aspirations. So then to encourage them to become part of the system becomes really complicated. So I think a lot of it is having at least, that one teacher that believes in you, or having that one administrator that believes in you, that really changes people's relationship with the educational system. And then again, also getting you can't become a teacher without a college degree, right? So if you are not making it past high school, if you're not making it into college, then you can't make it to get your teacher certification. So again, there's all these kind of steps in the way that kind of filter people, where more and more people get left behind. So if you're getting left behind, how are you going to then make it to this final step? So I think, like Kiara was talking about, this kind of just systemic, massive change that needs to happen in how we treat educators, but also how we approach education and how we treat students, and how we present opportunities, to then be able to have those teachers who support their students, and then their students can be kind of like see someone that looks like them and can kind of see what options are available. So I think there's just so many aspects that go into why there aren't more Latinx teachers, which then just it all kind of like cycles through, and makes it hard for there to be teachers. And as I was doing my research for my thesis, I came across this awful statistic that only 10% of Latino males get their bachelor's degree, right? So if only 10%, like just as a numbers game of like, you don't have enough people getting higher education, so then obviously they can't become teachers. So yeah, huge kind of restructuring of how we value education, I think, is a big thing.
Thanks for that insight, Lena. So then the next question from Dwayne. In North Carolina, I've observed the disproportionately low number of Latinx college advisors to large number of Latinx students aspiring to college enrollment. It is even more disheartening that there are far less Latinx program CBO leaders. To what extent do these disparities contribute to the low college admissions rate for Latinx students? And how could we go about ensuring that Latinx college access professionals are not just hardworking and qualified entry-level employees, but leaders who make decisions for college access programs and CBOs? So that for the first part of that question is, to what extent do these disparities contribute to the low college admissions rate for Latinx students?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to kind of the point that we were talking about, right? Like, how can there be large numbers of college advisors who need a college degree to become a college advisor if not enough Latinx people are making it into college? And then again, like to Kiara's point, like then there's also this pressure of I already took 4 years to go to school, which is like this fancy thing that probably not a lot of people in my family did. So I have to prove that me taking this time for self-discovery and those luxurious things, like I have to prove that it was worth it by really getting a job in a different field. like, I'll say right now, it was really hard for my parents to accept me doing college advising corps after getting my fancy degree from Duke, because I graduated and I made $27,000 a year. And they're like, you have a Duke degree. Like, why are you making less money than us?
Yeah.
And I'm like, because of the experience that I just had, I need to make sure that I'm not the only one that makes it to these spaces. So you have to, again, be really passionate about the work, because it doesn't come with a lot of money and it comes with a lot of pressure.
I'm laughing because I remember the day I got the call from CTAC, I called my mom and I was like, I got a job. And I was trying to explain to her, she didn't know what I was doing. And she was like, okay, well, how much are you making? And when I told her, she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, at least I get health insurance too. Trying to like, hype it up. But that is so real. I feel that very much so. So I think just highlighting again that question of to what extent to do these disparities contribute to the low college admissions rate. I think a lot of times there's this, which we've mentioned before, there's maybe a failure or a lack of understanding of the cultural differences in advising a Latinx student. So again, just thinking about this conversation with family, right? So like if your parents are not exposed to the college admissions process, if your parents haven't had these conversations, like maybe they do want you to go to college, but they're not necessarily understanding what that process entails and what it means. Having someone who is going to be able to explain that to a parent in a culturally relevant way is so powerful. And I think a lot of times we aren't able to provide that because, again, we don't have those folks who either have the training or have been exposed to these conversations. So I think that leads to less students seeking out the support that they need to be able to have this advising or these conversations than if we did have more Latinx advisors in these spaces who would be able to lead these discussions or conversations with the students and their family. Because I know I've had a lot of conversations about students who did have this fear of like, I don't want to, go live somewhere on campus, or I don't want to go somewhere out of state. And that is totally valid. But we need to talk about what those concerns stem from and see if there's any solution. And a lot of times it does stem from this fear of like, I don't want to be far away from home, or I want to make sure that there's an emergency, my mom is still able to drive and pick me up. And I think also not encouraging, but taking that into account, right? So a lot of times, like, I have a vision for a student, like I think that would be great at Stanford, right? But if that is not the vision that student has for themselves, who am I to force that upon them, right? So I think it's important to yes, expose students, but at the end of the day, also valuing and acknowledging the knowledge and experiences that they bring to the table, so that we can have a more, honest conversation and discussion. I think a lot of times we miss that when we, center the work around just the college access piece, and there is no acknowledgement of that cultural piece either. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said just made me think about, first of all, this access to culturally relevant information, just leaving that aside, just access to information in Spanish, right? So even if it's not culturally relevant, can I at least get the information in a way that my parents can even begin to understand it? I helped a lot of families fill out FAFSAs, and they had to trust me with me seeing their tax documents so that we could fill it in line by line together. And that takes a lot of trust. And I think, if we didn't have this cultural connection and I couldn't communicate with them in Spanish, I don't think those students' FAFSAs would have gotten filled out, right? So just having different people there that kind of can help you out, but also understand where you're coming from, is huge. And then I think the second point that you brought up about making sure that it's a conversation and that we're never telling students what to do, we're just presenting them with more options that are available, and then the choice is on them, because ultimately it's their journey and they're making choices based on their experiences, and we can't really speak to that, but again, we can give them the information which maybe wouldn't have been available otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, so our next question, we're going to do two last questions. One is from America. This summer, I got the opportunity to do the Into the Fields internship with staff, and was placed in the South Carolina Migrant Education Program. I'm mentored youth and young adults, one of which is applying for DACA and is now in the 10th grade. What advice would you give the students when they are thinking about going to college but have limitations?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is us trying to be as informed as possible about what opportunities are out there, because there are always options. And I think sometimes the hard part is that the main option and the like presented option that people like strive for isn't always available to everyone. But something that I really like to emphasize to my students is that it doesn't matter how you get to your goal as long as you get to your goal, and that path may not always be linear. It's going to take some detours, and you might have to take some night classes. You might have to consider taking your GED instead of graduating from high school. You might have to, some high schools have different options where you can get just like your basic diploma for less credits if you like get rid of extracurriculars and stuff. And community college is a great option, especially right now with COVID, where all classes are online and people are just kind of getting the same kind of course materials. So getting those kind of core classes out of the way in a community college closer to you, and then thinking about the next step in a four-year university sometimes is a huge help for students. And then sometimes community colleges have smaller communities where advisors are actually more they're more hands-on. So sometimes students feel a lot more supported in those kind of smaller communities than they would if they just get thrown headfirst into a four-year university. So again, it's all about considering the needs that the student has and presenting the options. And again, making sure that they keep their goal in mind, because those goals are attainable. They might just take way more work than it would for someone else. And that's not fair, but there is a way to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing that I will add, I think you just highlighted the important pieces. But one, the fact that your student, I mean, you guys, in the 10th grade, they still have a lot of time to really set themselves up for the most success, right? So there is, unfortunately, for students who don't have documentation or who have DACA, the opportunities that are presented for full funding are incredibly competitive. So the student who is in a situation like that needs to be unfortunate, like top of their class, like keeping up with. And this is an unfortunate scenario because not everyone else needs to be like that, right? But it is so important to have these conversations with those students to just really be honest of like, if you are, you have your eyes set on, for example, the Golden Door Scholarship, it just has gotten so much more competitive because it's been opened up to more students. And that's not to say that you can't do it, but you also have to, make sure you're doing really excelling in all ways. And then I think the other piece to really emphasize is Lena's point of like, your journey may be different and that is okay. You're still going to get to your end point. I think one of the other things that sometimes there's different messaging around, but dual enrollment. So for students who, are undocumented, if they are dually enrolled while they're in high school, they're still able to get those college credits. Whereas I've seen there's been more of a push, especially for high achieving students, to take AP courses. And we can dive into the weeds with that, but I won't today. Happy to have those conversations outside of this, but for undocumented students, it may make more sense for them to be dual enrolled because they're getting those college credits, and that's something that they can, continue on at their community college and ultimately graduate graduate early or graduate at least from high school with some credits that can transfer in, and that's less classes that they have to take. So just something to keep in mind as and I'm not sure about South Carolina policies, but something to keep in mind for that as well. And I just saw Kristen post a comment too about that specifically. So yeah, there are some limitations in North Carolina for undocumented and documented students. So it's different that Durham, Texas, has lots of services. So make sure that you're looking into that as well. Okay, so then the next question is from Krista. So what can be done to support Latinx high school and college students during COVID? So the reason, or this program that we're hosting, right? So it definitely encourages students to become a part of College y Consejos. The program, again, is we're not supplementing. We are very much hoping to still collaborate with counselors at their high schools but really it is a way to supplement the supports that they're receiving, and again, a culturally relevant way. So that is definitely one way that we would encourage you all to support students, of making sure that, you know, they have access to the supports that are going to be provided through college consejos in not only, you know, an environment, a virtual space, but also in a culturally relevant way that will be ultimately helpful to them and the students. It is going to be free again, so we're not charging students to take advantage of this program, but again, because it is free, we do depend on donor support. So another reminder, if you are able and feel inspired by the work, to please consider donating. And then Lena, maybe have any other thoughts outside of that piece.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're definitely like here to kind of meet the moment, because we know that students will need a lot of different support, and kind of building those college lists might look really different, especially, you know, financially. Like, a lot of people are losing their jobs, a lot of people are losing family members. Like, what does it mean now, right now, for me to be far away from home in this time? Like, can I see myself traveling out of state when I'm immunocompromised? Like, what does applying to college look like right now? So again, I think we're trying to find a lot of those answers for students, so that when they come to us with these questions, we're kind of able to support them wherever they are in their journey. And again, like Kiara said, like, we really rely on your support to be able to continue this work, and to be able to kind of meet the need of as many students as possible. So if we can, you know, get outreach in as many high schools as possible in North Carolina. Also, like, we're doing this work part-time, so we're also limited in our time. And right now we are kind of funded until December, but, you know, a lot of students will have questions that go on to the second semester of high school. And we really want to make sure that we have enough funding to be able to support them through the whole journey of them enrolling in college. So we really hope that some of what we said today resonated with you, that you learned something new, that maybe you're a little angry about things, whatever emotion you have, kind of, we would really appreciate it if you channeled that into a donation.
So again, our 6 minutes over, so we do definitely want to be conscious and considerate of time, but do want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We are so incredibly grateful for your support, and more specifically, you know, just want to emphasize again the power of community. We couldn't and wouldn't be able to do this work by ourselves. So thank you for your willingness to hear us, to be here with us in this space, as we continue to think about how to best support the Latinx youth of North Carolina. So we are incredibly appreciative of your time today. And again, if you are interested in sharing information with any of your students, or know of any students, we did share the form again. So we'll make sure to get that out to you all, and be on the lookout for more information about our official launch. But we are grateful for your time again, and thank you so much for being here. And Lena, it was wonderful to get to know you a bit better today.
I feel the same. Yeah, thank you guys for your support and for showing up here today. And definitely, if you have students that you think could benefit, send them our way.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Sean. Well, thank you so much for being here. We'll see y'all later. Bye, y'all.